Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Keith Fentonmiller, author of the novel Fait Accompli, Book 1 of the Water Nymph Gospels. Keith, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Sure. If someone hasn't heard about your novel Fait Accompli yet, how would you describe the novel?
Yeah, so the book falls into the historical fantasy and humor genres. Hopefully it falls into the humor genre. I'd say it's a mix of kind of Terry Pratchett and Madeline Miller, who wrote a fantastic book called Circe, among other books. I can give you the sort of the one sentence description and elaborate, or just go right into the elaboration, maybe take me a minute. But so in one sentence, it's about a cursed Renaissance hat maker. So we're in the Italian Renaissance. And he becomes embroiled in an Olympian clash when he uses a divine teleportation hat to rescue a woman who claims to be a water nymph, who's being held captive by a Medici prince who's possessed by the god Apollo. So there's kind of a lot to unpack there. The guts of the story really begins in 1603. We're in Tuscany, and we're introduced to Andalusia, who's a young hat maker, but he's got bigger dreams than making hats. He wants to be the next Galileo. The problem is his family has been cursed to make hats ever since the 4th century, when his Greek ancestors stole the god Hermes' teleportation hat. And the way the hat works, pretty simple. You think of a place, you ask the hat to take you there, and voila, there you go. And then there's Carlotta. She is a feisty Sicilian who dreams of building bridges and dams, just like her estranged father. But she's got two problems. First, she's a woman in the early 17th century. And second, like Andalusia, she's got a curse to deal with, because her ancestor was Daphne, the legendary water nymph from Greek mythology, who turned into a laurel tree while the god Apollo was pursuing her, trying to have sex with her. And what's not widely known among mythology experts, pretty much because I made this up, so it wouldn't be known at all, is that Apollo did not give up the chase after Olympus fell. So for centuries, he's been escaping oblivion, where the gods have been trapped since the 4th century, possessing mortal men and going after the women in her family. And now, in this story, he's possessed a very eccentric and powerful Medici. His name is Sansone de' Medici, and he's taken Carlotta prisoner. And so Andalusia encounters her at Sansone's palazzo, and he has to decide whether to use the hat to rescue her and face the ramifications, both in terms of his personal safety and in terms of the threat, because Sansone is so powerful in terms of regulating hats and everything else, and also in terms of the divine punishment that probably will come down on his head. So that's kind of where the story takes off.
Sure. Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to writing Fait Accompli?
It's really a difficult question to answer. I've given that a lot of thought, and I think I'd probably have to undergo years of hypnotherapy and maybe 3 or 4 vision quests to kind of figure out the germ of the idea. I guess I would say that I've always been fascinated by realistic stories with a touch of fantasy. Probably goes back to my love of Mary Poppins and the Mary Poppins book, which kind of was this merger of the everyday with the dream world, with the kind of absurd element to it. So probably my fascination with magical realism. So, the particular myth, I don't know why I chose the Daphne myth. Again, I think that would require not only hypnotherapy, but perhaps psychotherapy as well. But I just I liked being able to weave the historical detail in with mythology to play with concepts that are interesting to me, like free will, father-son relationships, father-daughter relationships, religion versus science, and hypocrisy at all levels, large and small, even amongst the gods. So And then hats in particular, when I was thinking about this, have fascinated me since childhood. And I think that's because of the book Old Hat, New Hat. It was just one of the first books that I really loved. I loved the illustrations. I loved the fussy customer who thought some hats were too twisty and others were too twirly. And I think that also was sort of embedded in my subconscious, just as something that I was really fascinated with.
So the subtitle of your book has book one. Are you writing more books in the series?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've written all the 4 other books in the series, and they are in various stages of revision right now. They become progressively less polished as we get to the 5th book, but yep, they're all written.
Great. Well, what was your own writing journey that led you to writing and getting your first novel published?
I've had a long-standing interest in theater and sketch comedy in particular. When I got to college at University of Michigan, I joined a group called Comedy Company, and then later, after I graduated, sort of took this on the road, and we were writing sketches and performing them, and that really, I think, planted the seed for the writing bug, for the creative writing bug. And I didn't, and I had written some short stories and things like that in college, but the novel writing bug didn't really hit until about 2003, and I just felt compelled to write something in a longer form. And I tapped out 300 pages of something that started out promising and then quickly devolved into nonsense, and it just couldn't be saved. And I think that's typical for most writers on their journey. They'll write a lot and then have to chuck it. And then so I tried again. I started taking classes at the Writer Center, which is a great resource here in the DC area, just to bring a little bit more structure and discipline to my writing. And I actually did complete a novel, which I was very happy with. It didn't go anywhere in terms of, publication or finding an agent, but it was very instructive. And then finally, the third time around in 2011, I somehow settled on this idea of weaving Greek mythology into a story set in the modern day, and entered it in the Amazon, I think it was called the Breakthrough or Breakout Novel Competition. That was in 2011. And to my shock, it got to the semifinals. And so, this is great. And when I sat back and kind of looked at what I had, I realized that there was a lot more than one story embedded in this particular novel. And I originally thought, okay, well, it's probably 3. And then as the years went by, I realized it was probably 5. And so it was really an evolutionary process.
Well, when you sat down to write Fait Accompli, did you plot the novel extensively, or do you work more organically and just kind of jump into the story?
Well, I really wanted to be a plotter, as they say, be organized. And when I started to write down what essentially would become this story, I'd written a very detailed, single space 40-page outline. And as I got to writing it, I realized I was deviating a lot from it, from what I had outlined. And what I came to understand about myself is that my best writing occurs when I'm writing from my subconscious mind. And rather than trying to plan things out with the analytical side of my brain, kind of just letting go and letting things flow through the other side. And the plotting was a very good starting point for sure. You need some idea of what the story's about and where it's going. But I found that pre-planning a lot of the key details kind of ruined the fun part, or at least the funnest part for me, which is that discovery of, this is what I'm really trying to say. I may think I'm trying to tell this story, but my subconscious mind knows better of what I'm really trying to say. And so when I sort of give into that and just let that side of me flow through my fingers into the keyboard, the story takes on a different form. Now, as a result, it can be a.
There are so many reasons not to skip breakfast. So many savory, mouth-watering, tasty, delicious beyond all belief reasons. Actually, that last one was pretty convincing. Stop by for a McDonald's breakfast. Mix and match a sausage biscuit, sausage McMuffin, sausage burrito, or hash browns, any two for just $2. Price and participation may vary, cannot be combined with combo meal.
With MailChimp, you get a whole lot more than a URL. You get an all-in-one marketing platform to help drive sales. That means you can connect your data to make more informed, smarter decisions. And you get powerful automation tools like our Customer Journey Builder to ensure you never miss an opportunity to turn shoppers into loyal customers. So if you're ready to integrate your marketing and boost sales, get started today at MailChimp.com/smartmarketing. MailChimp, built for growing businesses.
Frustrating process and difficult to predict when something actually will be completed, but that's what works for me. I need some structure, some sort of scaffold to start writing, but the flesh and the organs of the story kind of grow haphazardly, and then I figure out what I have and try to shape it into a Frankenstein's monster of a story, and hopefully it works for people.
Sure. Well, given your writing and your publication today, what writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories or novels?
Well, certainly there are a list of resources that I have found very helpful. One thing is, I think that everyone should at least go experience a writer's workshop at least once. People have different opinions about it, and a lot of that experience, the quality of that experience is really contingent on who's in your group and how open they are to receiving feedback and how constructive the feedback is that they deliver to you. But that is really part of the process. Some might think it as a form of writerly hazing, but it is really necessary to expose your work to people who you think will give you constructive criticism. And then when you receive that criticism, try to filter out what you think is the most constructive parts of it. And if you're hearing the same thing from multiple readers, chances are there's something there that you need to deal with, a plot hole or some weird thing about a character. And, you just have to, it's tough because I tend to have a thin skin, but you have to develop a thicker skin and realize that in the end, that criticism is going to make the end work product much, much better. And I've always found that every time, I'm anticipating the feedback and, it's going to be negative. They're not going to like it. I always have to remind myself that it's going to be so much better when you filter out the constructive aspects and incorporate and revise. And it never fails me. That's always true. So I think that would be one of the biggest overarching pieces of advice I would give to a writer starting out.
Well, you mentioned Terry Pratchett earlier. What novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed and that you would recommend?
Yeah, that's it's a big list. But I'd say the ones that I've read recently that I really, really liked, nonfiction wise. Cast by Isabella Wilkerson, just an incredible narrative. It's nonfiction. It deals with issues of race and class, but she writes in a very narrative style, so I find it very accessible. In terms of fiction books, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, The Dutch House by Ann Patchett, The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. So those are some really good ones that I would recommend.
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they want to find out more about you and your books?
So they could start off at my website, which is just my name, KeithFentonmiller.com. And you can find me on Instagram. It's at KFentonMiller. So it shouldn't be too hard to find. Have a footprint out there.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Keith Fentonmiller, author of the novel Fait Accompli, Book 1 of the Water Nymph Gospels. The book is on sale now, so go buy a copy. And Keith, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, stay tuned for a brief excerpt from the audiobook of Fait Accompli, the Water Nymph Gospels, Book 1, by Keith Fentonmiller.
Chapter 6. Mount Othrys, 1600 BCE. Moira modeled her new loom on her former one in Tartarus, substituting wood for iron. She was pleased the wooden version didn't radiate cold or require nearly as much exertion to operate as its ferrous ancestor. Rather than clanging against the frame with a harsh metallic clink-clunk, the wooden batten knocked with a muted thub-dup. The crashing cymbal sound of her old loom had been superseded by a thumping bass drum. Throw, thub-dup, thub-dup, throw, thub-dup, thub-dup. Her loom of destiny had a heartbeat. It was cumbersome to weave with destiny thread of varying thicknesses, so Moira segregated and spliced segments of the same thickness into 3 gauges, wound them onto separate 6-foot-tall spools, and mounted the spools on dowel rods for ease of rotation. She then wove some experimental tapestries. She started with relatively minor, time-limited destinies, a slip-and-fall accident, a brief tryst, food poisoning from spoiled goat meat. After those proved successful, she graduated to marriages, children, occupations, and deaths. More success. The process was simple, really. She needed only keep the fate's particulars in the forefront of her mind and let her hands translate them into her unique textural language. "Splendid!" Cronus beamed after Moira informed him of her progress. "Gaia is finishing her preparations with the oracles. We should be ready to launch in earnest quite soon." Cronus inspected the experimental tapestries hanging on a rack. As he ran his fingers over the fabric, he delighted in the tingling sensation and marveled at Moira's artistry. He turned to several tapestry woven from the thicker threads. Their designs were similar to the others, replete with Moira's inscrutable logograms, but these tapestries were hotter and more magnetic. "These are especially vibrant," he remarked. "Because they are for demigods and gods. I discovered their fates require the thickest gauge of thread." "You wove a god's fate?" Cronus asked in a mortified tone. "Several, my lord." Cronus's left eye twitched. "Which gods?" "Oh, minor, obscure deities." "Hee. Who exactly, Moira?" he pressed, voice shaky. She gestured to the tapestry before him. "That one there is for Prophasis, the spirit of excuses and pleas." She sounded so querulous, I think, because she lacked self-confidence. I arranged to have her fight and vanquish a giant. Since then, there's not a hint of whininess in her voice, and she speaks with gravitas. Same tired old excuses, but now they're actually persuasive. The next tapestry over is for Gelos, the spirit of laughter. I never found Gelos very funny. All puns and scatological humor about the public privy. I arranged it so he'd walk into a tavern with a gorgon, a harpy, and a man-eating giant. The peril dramatically improved Gelos's timing and inspired many new jokes, good jokes. Everyone was too consumed with laughter to kill each other, at least they were when I left them. Cronus tugged nervously on his bottom lip. He glanced around the throne room, assessing whether anyone was in earshot. He took Moira by the elbow and escorted her behind the loom. "Moira," he said urgently, "this is a very grave development." "It is?" "Yes, very grave. Your ability to determine the fates of gods, should it become widely known, could spell disaster. The selfish gods, and there are many, believe me, would pressure you to weave tapestries that further their interests at the expense of the others. Why, a mere swatch from your loom could end my reign." Moira was affronted. "I would never weave such a tapestry, my lord." "I know you wouldn't, not willingly. But if you were under duress, you might have no choice but to weave me a fate like my father's." He unconsciously tented his fingers in front of his groin. Moira smacked her palm on her forehead. "Forgive me, my lord. I had no idea. What should I do? Keep this discovery to yourself. And heavens forbid, if anyone asks you to make a god's fate tapestry, demur. Say only Gaia, only the mother goddess, can commission a god's destiny. No one would go up against mother. Is that clear?" "Yes, my lord." "Good. Remove the spool of thickest thread from this room at once, and be discreet." Moira immediately relocated the spool of God-gauge thread to a utility closet and concealed it behind a curtain woven to resemble the room's marble walls. It would remain there until the gods were able to keep their selfish tendencies at bay. In other words, forever.
With MailChimp, you get more than a URL. You get an all-in-one marketing platform to help drive sales. With things like data-driven recommendations and powerful automation tools. Get started today at MailChimp.com/smartmarketing. MailChimp, built for growing businesses.
Okay, so if you're like me and still doing your back-to-school shopping, one word, Kohl's. Right now they have the best deals on the brands my kids love. I got my son Converse sneakers for $60, 25% off Vans tees for my daughter, and 25% off Nike gear for both of them. Oh, but the best part? I got an extra 20% off and Kohl's Cash too. So I may just have to go back and get a little something for myself. Select styles, Vans, Converse, and Nike coupons do not apply. 20% offer ends August 29th. Some exclusions apply. See store or kohls.com for details.